Ville Platte, Louisiana, August 30th, 1939. We stayed in Ville Platte during the war years, and after the war, my father was transferred to Cameron Parish. They needed a French-speaking agent, he was a county agent with the LSU Extension Service. And so he got the job, and we moved to Cameron in the late 40s, and there I was raised. Went to school there, graduated from South Cameron High School. When I went to LSU, I wasn't certain about my career. So like a lot of students, I took general studies, found that I liked reading and writing and literature, so English was sort of a fallback subject. Not that I ever wanted to do anything with an English degree, but I started eyeing law school because the tools of the law, of course, involve reading and writing, and that's why I think I developed an interest in going to law school. The story of the courthouse is rather interesting. It is rather dated now, but it was an enormous achievement for Cameron to get the courthouse. The story is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt went hunting down in Cameron, made friends with a gentleman named Bonsall, Jim Bonsall, who was his guide. And the story is even to detail a little bit more. I think Roosevelt got lost or got wet or something, and Bonsall took care of him physically, and he was very grateful to Mr. Bonsall. And so in the late 30s, Bonsall wrote him a letter and said Cameron needed a courthouse. Either the old one had burnt or it was just falling down for age. It was made of wood. And so Roosevelt directed some of the funds from many of his programs to Cameron, and this concrete monolithic building was built down there, which was probably looked out of place at the time. During Hurricane Audrey, some 2,000 or 3,000 people were saved by going to the courthouse, and that included my mother and father and baby sister. Audrey was one of the worst natural disasters in American history in the 20th century. Some 600 lives were lost just within a few hours of that hurricane's arrival. I was at the time at college at LSU for that when Audrey came. I traveled from Baton Rouge to Lake Charles hitchhiking. In those days, most students didn't have automobiles, and you couldn't get to Cameron immediately after the storm. The roads were out, and so I went to Ellenda's Ferry Landing in Hackberry, Louisiana. I hitchhiked over there and got in a boat with a Methodist preacher who was bringing first aid supplies to Cameron. And we rode down the Calcasieu River. We turned the bend at Cameron on the old river, and we bumped up on the land right in front of the courthouse. But the view was obscured by the mounds of debris. But the place we hit the river, hit on the river bank, was where a big diesel mechanic shop had been, and it was a shop that I had worked in as a young man. I was very familiar with it. But it was totally unrecognizable, to the point that when we stopped, I asked the man, "Why are we stopping here?" He said, "This is Cameron." And I told him, "No, sir, this isn't Cameron." He said, "Climb up on that pile of debris and look." And so I did. I shinned up on some tin and wood and looked over the top, and there I could see the courthouse. It was practically the only thing standing, and I knew I was back home. In 1965, I graduated,
Okay.
and I went into practice with a firm in Crowley, Louisiana. I just had to have a job, you might say. I stayed in Crowley for 3 years, and I enjoyed it there. Calcasieu Marine National Bank was one of the largest banks in southwest Louisiana, and it was building a new bank down in Cameron. And the president of the board of Calcasieu Marine Bank was a man named W.T. Burton, who wanted to have he wanted the Cameron Bank to have in-house counsel. And so I was contacted by the bank and asked if I would consider moving to Cameron and represent the bank. I had done a lot of banking work because with the firm I was in Crowley represented both the local bank and the local savings and loan. So a lot of my work had been title searches and mortgage work and the documentation that goes along with lending money. So I moved to Cameron with a client. That was good to have. Up until the late 30s, when a road was built to Cameron, it was virtually an island. And the way that people traveled to and from Cameron was on the Calcasieu River, and there was a boat, a steamer, a stern wheeler steamer named the Borealis Rex that plied the Calcasieu River. It brought the mail, it brought passengers, it brought produce, it brought automobiles, it even brought cattle. And it made a trip 3 or 4 times a week, back and forth. It also brought the judge and his court reporter and whatever other court personnel he needed when they had court scheduled down in Cameron. That was the way it was run for from the 1800s right up until the late 1930s. It was difficult for the judges in Lake Charles to make the trip. It was more than an hour drive on not such good roads. And so there was sometimes a feeling down in Lower Cameron that if we had our own judicial district, our own judge, we could run to the courthouse and we could get orders signed and we could get things set earlier and we wouldn't have to depend upon being second fiddle to whatever was going on in the Lake Charles half of the 14th Judicial District Court. So we began envisioning maybe one day having our own judicial district. When Judge Cecil Cottrell decided to run for the Court of Appeal, it presented an opportunity for us to make a public relations move. And so what I did was I ran for the open seat in the 14th Judicial District Court. It was not an opportune time to run at all because there were a lot of horses in the race. There was, let me say, it was Charlie Richard, who was, I think he was being backed by, he was an assistant DA, and he was being backed by Frank Salter, who was a district attorney. And there was Ellie Halsey, who was being backed by the sheriff. And there was a very popular gentleman from West Cal named Jim Smith, who had everybody on the other side of the river. Jim McInnes was also in that race, and he was popular with a lot of the black population, and there was a certain element that he identified with. So I knew there was very little chance of my making there was very little chance of my being in a runoff or winning the seat. But we used it as an opportunity to trumpet that Cameron didn't have a judge, and my campaign ads were sort of turned to that effect. So as soon as the the race was over, we filed the necessary legislation to have a referendum to split the parish, excuse me, to split the district into two judicial districts. So the referendum had to pass both Cameron and Calcasieu. We knew it would pass Cameron. We were a little bit worried about Calcasieu. Judge Earl Veron, who had gone from the district bench now then into federal court, he was in favor of it, and so we had support from the legal community, and so the general population of Calcasieu Parish supported it too. It passed, and the 38th Judicial District was created. The first judge of the 38th Judicial District Court was yours truly. I always like to say that, jokingly, that I told everybody it was an appointed position, and that's why I never had opposition over 35 years. The first district attorney was Jerry Jones, and that's how the 38th Judicial District came to be. When Hurricane Rita struck southwest Louisiana,
2005.
in 2005, it completely lay this country prostrate. The city of Lake Charles was just completely shut down. Well, you can imagine what Cameron was like. Everything had been inundated with water, if it hadn't been completely demolished. Again, the courthouse was about the only thing standing. So, as you can imagine, judicial service, the function of the court was at a standstill. I was graciously contacted by both the 14th Judicial District Court and by Judge Minaldi with the federal bench at the time, that they offered offices and other services so I could function in Lake Charles. I took advantage of the offer from the 14th because they had just more room, and I was familiar with the way they did things. So for 6 months, I held court in Lake Charles for Cameron matters. And the clerk of court, my clerk of court, moved to Jennings, Louisiana, and so that's it's rather unique to have things filed in Jennings, Louisiana, and heard in Lake Charles, Louisiana, for matters that really are Cameron matters. But after 6 months, we tried to get the courthouse back. Now, when I say we tried to get the courthouse back, because the courthouse was the only functional building in Cameron, it had been commandeered by the government. FEMA was using it, the Corps of Engineers was using it, all the services were using it. When I first got to my office, which is probably a month after Rita, my chambers was the bunk room for the offices of the Corps of Engineer. And I walk into my office and I have socks and underwear, hanging around the place, and bunks all over the floor. But I have to give it to them, when they left, they did a great job of picking up everything, and I couldn't tell that that men had been living in my office for that period of time.